Ethan Fisher has over 20 years of experience working in the zoo and the aquarium industry. He enjoys discovering novel solutions and approaches to projects and problems and experiences every day at the Santa Ana Zoo, brings new challenges and even greater rewards. His interest in animals began at an early age, spending time exploring the tide pools and trails of Southern California. The spirit of curiosity ultimately led him to a Bachelor's of Biology at UC Irvine. Ethan continued his studies with a certificate in business administration from UC Irvine Extension. He joined the Santa Ana Zoo in 2001, starting out as a part-time summer camp instructor and became director in 2017. Ethan enjoys connecting the community with nature and immersing people in his landscape. With growing interest in plants, he's currently completing his final year of the landscape architectural program at UCLA Extension. So let's give a hearty welcome to Ethan Fisher. Over to you, Ethan.
Thank you, Jay. It's great to be here and tell you a little bit about the zoo and our animals and what we have going on right down the road from the cube. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Today's March 9th, and yesterday was the zoo's birthday. So the zoo opened on March 8th, 1952. So yesterday was 69 years for the Santa Ana Zoo here in Orange County. And next year is going to be a big birthday for us. So we're excited about that. Just to orient you, I'm not sure how many people have been to the zoo before. Hopefully everybody, but hopefully after this, if you haven't been, you'll come and visit. So you can go ahead, you can see we're right around the corner from the Cube and Bowers Museum, just a couple of miles. And the zoo, when it began in 1952, it started with monkeys. As Joe was alluding to, we are definitely all about the primates here at the Santa Ana Zoo. And the zoo came into being with the original 12 acres or so. And it was a deed to the city of Santa Ana by Joseph Edward Prentice. He was a local landowner. He owned a lot of property around Santa Ana, and he moved out to California from the Midwest and had a passion for monkeys. He kept them as pets in his house. Supposedly there's stories about how he tormented his housekeepers with the monkeys, but he had no kids and he wanted to leave a legacy in the community. He wanted to leave a place for children and families to go. And that's how he came up with the idea of a park that had monkeys. And so this is a photo of Mr. Prentice. Here's another photo of the early days of the zoo in the 50s. And again, like was referenced before, we do serve the same demographic. And you can see the kids here in the 1950s coming to visit the zoo. And we continue today with lots of field trips and providing a space for kids to learn about the life sciences, about animals, about nature, about the different inhabitants of our world. Here's a map from 1949. The zoo definitely has developed much further beyond this original rendering of the park, which had an area for the 50 monkeys. And when the zoo opened, it did have exactly 50 monkeys. And then there was going to be a park space with baseball diamonds and a picnic area, and eventually expanded with the children's zoo and 2 more land additions to the full 20 acres that we are today. This was in the 70s. The zoo was here before the 5 freeway came through in the late 50s. And now we've taken over most of this space. In 2018, there was a new master plan for the zoo that capitalizes on some of the different biomes of the earth. So there's a forest area, a grasslands area, and a riverine area with aquatic animals. We are a mission-driven organization. And we have a vision of being a force for conservation action. So a couple of the projects I'll talk about later on are some of the conservation projects that we're involved in that are not really publicized that much. And this handsome cat that's in the photo here is our male Ocelot. They're a really gorgeous spotted cat from South America, about 25 to 30 pounds. So not a massive tiger-sized cat, but an animal that represents the forest habitats that are being affected by deforestation and fragmentation, and just a really special animal we have here at the zoo. I'll go through first just a couple of the exhibit and areas of the zoo to orient everyone to the facility and the park. One of my favorite areas of the zoo is the Tropical Aviary that was built in 1996. And this was a photo when it was under construction. And as you go through this space, it's a great place to appreciate the different layers of the forest. There's understory plants that you can look at up close, see things that have unique textures and colors, and that's where you might find some of the smaller birds like our whistling ducks and the sunbittern, which is a fun little bird from South America. And then you go up into the higher levels of the trees that are in this space, and you'll see animals like the scarlet ibis, which is a beautiful orange bird from South America as well. And right now, this photo on the right is the clivia, which bloom every March, and they're all in bloom right now. It's a really pretty flowering plant from South Africa. So this is how the aviary has grown in over the years, and it's an area that we use in our education programs a lot to teach about adaptations with the birds and their different feeding strategies. All of them have different shaped beaks, like the ibis that I was referencing have a very long, thin beak that has sensitive nerves at the end of it, so they can probe around in the mud and find crustaceans. And then there's birds like the sun conures, which are a little parrot, really noisy, very gregarious species. Everyone that walks through the aviary, if you don't see anything else, you'll definitely see the sun conures. And this photo on the right shows some of the plants growing around the pond. So a great space, and it's a nice place to immerse yourself in the landscape and feel transported out of Orange County, actually. Amazon's Edge is another one of my favorite places at the zoo. It's supposed to represent a South American river with mud bank walls and a thatched roof. And this was also built in the early 90s. And it's grown in a lot over the last couple decades. And the reason that it is so lush right now is because there's some trees that were planted in the early 90s that are becoming quite massive. They're called Ficus macrophylla. It's the Moreton Bay fig. And that's a really key part of the ecosystem that we're able to educate people about, because they produce so much habitat and so much food for the animals. As you go through this exhibit space, you'll see the howler monkeys, and then you could also learn about the trees that provide habitat for the animals. And it's an exhibit that's actually going to be going under construction very soon, and we'll be building a space for giant river otters. So it's going to be evolving and growing and just becoming a really neat representation of the South American ecosystem along the riverbank. So then, as I referenced before, the zoo is sort of starting to develop into different biomes that represent different habitats on different continents. And the Tierra de las Pampas exhibit, it represents the South American grasslands. It originally was a park, and this fun little train came to the zoo in the late 90s. It was actually a train from Santa's village in San Bernardino that was purchased when they closed. So the train first came in, and then later in the early 2000s, the area was turned into a representation of a Baja California garden. So there was cacti brought in and agaves and different wildflowers, with the ultimate plan of turning it into something else. And it was used for a movie. And then in 2009, it was finally developed into a South American grasslands. And the little animals that you could see in the back, they're not so little, but they're called guanacos, which are the wild ancestor of the llama. So the llama was a domesticated guanaco. So we have them here in the grasslands. And you'll also notice this little yellow tree right in the center there. That's called an ombu tree. And before I'll come back to the ombu tree, but we'll first talk about the rhea. So this is another inhabitant of the grasslands, which is a greater rhea from Argentina. Uh, and this white bird is a leucistic bird. So it just means it's not albino. It just means it has less pigmentation in it, and that's why it's white. And sometimes that happens with animals. Right now we have peafowl, so like peacocks. We have leucistic peacocks at the zoo, and they're also white in appearance like this. So it's kind of a neat little thing that sometimes shows up. And we have some other animals that we're able to point out the diversity. But coming back to the ombu tree, what this is a really special botanical element in this area, because in Argentina there aren't many trees in the grasslands habitat. But the ombu tree is one that is there, and it's actually not a true woody tree. It's basically an overgrown shrub that gets about 60 feet high, and it grows really fast. So in 2009, it was a little tiny stick here with a one dying leaf that was donated to us from the Huntington Library, and over the 10 years from planting it, it turned into this massive tree. So now it provides great shade for the animals that live in this space. And it's just a interesting tree to educate people about and to see. So that's our ombu tree. A conservation project that we've become involved in over the last few years that I want to highlight, that shows a little bit about what's going on behind the scenes, is our work with the mountain yellow-legged frogs. It may be hard to see if your screen isn't that big, but this is a species of amphibian from Southern California. Historically, they were in the mountain ranges of the San Gabriel Mountains, the San Gabriel, San Bernardino, and San Jacinto Mountains, sort of near Palm Springs. And they were doing pretty well through the 1970s, and that's when the population started declining. And it continued to decline and decline and decline until it finally reached a point where there were only about 200 adults living in the wild. And this is a high elevation species, so they live in the most pristine water at the headwaters of the river systems, where it's basically just snow melts. That's what they would live in. But they were declining, and there were a lot of different reasons for that. Some of it was invasive fish. So as the streams were seeded with rainbow trout, those fish would eat the tadpoles. Also, of course, there's pollution that's migrating into their environment, and there was a fungal disease called chytrid that was affecting amphibians throughout the whole world. That certainly did affect the mountain yellow-legged frogs too. And it even going further than that, their life history contributed to some of their issues. And part of that is because their tadpoles overwinter. A lot of frogs, they lay their egg, a couple months later, you have a little frog. With the mountain yellow-legged frog, they take 2 years to mature from an egg into a small frog, and they go through the snow, the winter, and then they come out. So that's hard, and there's a lot of opportunities for them to fail during that period. So here's a photo of their actual habitat in Southern California, and what the frogs look like. And we have a partnership with a federal agency, with the U.S. Geological Survey. They have offices and some staff that are here at the zoo, and they're out in the field doing research on this species. They've been monitoring the different climatic conditions for them. They've been monitoring the water temperature and the air temperature, and doing counts on the animals. for the last 15 years. So they have a lot of data, and then they've turned now to the zoos to help with the care of the animals. Some of them have been brought into human care, and now we're working to breed them and produce animals that can be released into streams that are safe for them. So in some areas, they've had to eradicate the trout and make it safe for the frogs to come back. And we lovingly call this area our frog pod. It's actually a refrigerated shipping container, oceanic shipping container that has been repurposed into an amphibian laboratory. All the water has to be chilled because they're high elevation, so they need water that's in the 50s and 60s. Right now, they're just about ready to come out of hibernation. So this is not what the space looks like right now. All the tanks are covered in black plastic bags so that they're in the dark. And the temperature, I think, is actually in the high 40s in the tanks. It's really cold. It's not very comfortable if you have to stick your hands in there and work in the tanks. It's like sticking your hands in ice water and then trying to take care of an aquarium. But that's where we are. So we have about 50 tadpoles that we're raising out into small frogs, and then hopefully next year they'll be able to be released back into the wild, and then we'll start with a new batch. And in the process, we're learning more about their care and things that we could do that'll help protect them and protect the diversity in our local environment. And the great thing about where these animals are from, they are part of the Santa Ana River watershed, which also includes our immediate area that we're in. We're just at different ends of it. Another project, we work with different students that do internships. Right now, we're working with a graduate student at UCLA that's studying tool use in capuchin monkeys. This is a crested capuchin here that's manipulating a device, and it wasn't documented that capuchins, or crested capuchins specifically, use tools. So that was the question that they wanted to address. Of course, they came and talked to us, and we said they definitely do use tools. We see it every day, but they needed to go through the scientific method and prove that. So we've been working with the graduate student for the past 6 months on this project, and this species is from Brazil. They're in an area called the Atlantic Coastal Rainforest, which is a habitat that's really endangered and highly fragmented now. And the reason that that's a problem for primates especially is when the land area starts to become fragmented and there's gaps where maybe there's agriculture between the forests, the animals don't have any connectivity between the spaces. So the populations are now split into these little islands, which is a problem for genetic diversity. And that's actually a problem we deal with in Southern California too, especially with large mammals like mountain lions. So that's what they're struggling with in Brazil, is some habitat pressures, and they're in this area now that is only about the size of the state of New York, 46,000 square miles, and that's down almost 50% from the last survey within the last 10 years or so. So whenever we can be involved in observational research with the animals, we try to do that, and we also try to collect samples when we're doing veterinary procedures that can contribute to the knowledge base about the animals. And then besides conservation work with the animals and learning about them, we also try to be resource minded and contribute to resource conservation. The biggest resource we use at the zoo is water. And right now, our water use is about 5.7 million gallons a year, which is a huge number. And we try to reduce that where we can through the best practices possible. With us, a lot of it comes from irrigating the landscape. And we've been working on putting in smart controllers. So those are weather-based irrigation controllers that know when it rains, it shuts off the sprinklers. It also knows how much evapotranspiration is happening with the plants, so that it knows how much water to apply to the landscape to keep the plants healthy. Also things like replacing green lawns or grass with drought tolerant plant material. So we've been working through this to make a lot of improvements with our water use over the years. And additionally, something that is more something that's a little bit easier for the public to see is a stormwater garden that we're working on right now. And the reason we're putting in the stormwater garden in our farm area is to help process all of the water that hits the impermeable surfaces like the roof of the barn. The rainwater will basically wash off the entire roof of the building and flush any nasty chemicals or things that have settled on that building from the air. It'll flush that all eventually into the storm drain and down to the ocean. So if we can process all of that water through our storm garden, one, we could slow down the rate of water going into the storm water system. We can also percolate some of the water into the ground and go back into the groundwater. And we could also filter it, and the plants can filter the water so that it's cleaner if it does end up going into the stormwater system. And so this is a project that I'm really excited about, and it's going to be a great place for some of our education programs to happen. A lot of the plants, well, all the plants are going to be climate adapted. So they're plants that do well in our Mediterranean climate in California. So they can take the hot, dry summers, and they can take the wet winters, especially being in a rain garden where they're inundated by inches of water. So this is something that's happening soon. And also point out that the zoo is both about the animals and the plants, and the garden is a big part of the zoo, providing both an appreciation for the natural world, great shade as you're strolling through the zoo with your family, and it's a source of food for the animals, a really important source of food for us. Some of the monkeys especially are folivorous, so they eat lots and lots of leaves, and we need to supplement their diet with natural vegetation. So they can't eat only lettuce, they can't eat only salads. And many of the trees that we grow in the zoo, we can harvest and feed them what we call browse, which is their young shoots and leafy material that we collect from the trees in the park. And to improve our browse collection, and also just the urban forest that is the zoo, we've been working on planting a lot of trees and improving the tree diversity through the park. All the trees are GPS located, so we can go into a software program and know the exact coordinates of every tree. We know how long it's been planted here, what species it is, when it was last pruned, and that's something that we're continuing, and we want to add more diversity, which benefits the animals and it benefits the people that come to the park or live in the community, improving the air quality. Education and the community are huge for the zoo, just like the science center, and the zoo is a place for experiential learning in the natural environment, because many families that come to the zoo don't have opportunities to get out into nature for many different reasons. So being that green spot on the map that's right around the corner is just a great thing to offer the community. And before I wrap up, we do have a quick animal meet and greet, and this is actually a radiograph, an X-ray from our veterinary hospital of the animal we're going to meet. I think it'll be hard to take guesses as to what this animal is, but as soon as you see him, you will know. So I'm going to change the camera angle here, and what? And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Okay. So this is Gordy, and I could try to zoom in on him. Oops. And Lauren is my helper here. Lauren manages all the education programs at the zoo, and she she has Gordy, who is a three-banded armadillo from South America. And he's one of our ambassador animals. So he comes out for programs and then also meets all the kids that come to the zoo for zoo camp and the people that come to the zoo on the weekends and see our animal presentations. He and that was his X-ray that you saw. So he is a mammal. He has hair. He has skin. Um, and the babies, the young armadillos, would drink milk. So those are all characteristics of a mammal. He's a three-banded armadillo because he has these three, sort of like this. He's sort of like an accordion in a way. So there's three bands there, and he's one species of armadillo that can roll up completely into a ball. Not every armadillo can do that. He would be from the grasslands in South America, and he's not an endangered species, but he is a species that's having some habitat pressure and hunting pressure on them, so they're not doing as well as they used to. But he is actually part of a conservation program, so we work with other zoos, and they make different recommendations on which animals should go to which zoo. So he's part of that conservation program. And then we try to learn as much about him as we can. An animal that he's related to at the zoo, he's related to the armadillos, and he's also related to the anteaters. So we have giant anteaters at the zoo. I'm a UCI alumni. And they're all related. They're called xenarthrans. So just a really cool animal, and I'll see if you can get a little bit closer to him. There we are. So his name is Gordy. We named him Gordy or Bolito. He has two names. Bolito because he's like a ball, and Gordy because he sort of looks like a brown gourd. But just one of my favorite animal ambassadors that we have here at the zoo. And if you come to the zoo, hopefully you'll have a chance to meet him. So that's about all that I prepared for right now, but I'm happy to take questions if anyone has questions. We are open. We're open Wednesday through Sunday. Everyone's welcome to come to the zoo. We open at 10 a.m. and we sell our last admission at 4 o'clock. And there's a little bit of a modified experience from the normal zoo experience. And right now the rides are closed, but it's a great way to passively explore the zoo and meet some of the animals and just get a breath of fresh air. There's a great project called Frog Watch, which is a citizen science project for amphibian conservation, because globally amphibians have a lot of struggles for many different reasons, and the mountain yellow-legged frog is one example from our own backyard, but especially through Central and South America with the chytrid fungus crisis, that affected a lot of species. But so Frog Watch is a great program. If you just look it up, and that's an easy way to get involved. Hopefully in the future, we'll have some more opportunities with amphibians at the zoo for youth. It's something that we want to develop. We're starting to work on, and the frog area, you can actually look in the window. So that's something that's nice as well, because right now we're not allowed to actually display the mountain yellow-legged frog. Our state permits, they don't allow anyone in the state to do that because they're protected, but they did allow us to have some windows into the laboratory so you can see what's going on with the care for those animals. But I would recommend Frog Watch. That's a program that came about in the 1970s as zoos and aquariums were recognizing we need to do more for some of the animals that were living in the zoos. And the species survival program, the nitty-gritty of it I'll go into the background of it. There is a volunteer that works at a zoo or aquarium, and they are the population manager. So they keep track of all of the genetics of all the animals of that species in all the different organizations. So they know exactly where Frankie the howler monkey lives and who his parents were and his grandparents. And the goal would be to track the whole lineage of that species, so that as you make recommendations and work with a population biologist, uh, you can keep the best genetic diversity in those animals, so that we're not taking any animals from the wilds. So we're working together with each other. And in addition to that, it also sort of creates a clearinghouse for information. So if you're a researcher and you research spider monkeys, you can go directly to that population manager and reach all these different zoos that have these animals and create a data set if there's behavioral data you're trying to collect, and hopefully get information that will have an impact on conservation in the wild with these animals. So that's a little bit about the species survival program. The situation was so unprecedented for the zoos and the aquariums. We learned a lot about the animals in this process, and there's the primates especially. They do watch us just as much as we watch them, and that was really clear through this past year. With the primates, they all have great connections with the animal care staff, with the zookeepers, and a lot of them we've given more enrichment and novel things, and we've like the crested capuchins with that research project. The Danny, who's the researcher, she became great friends with the crested capuchins because she was here almost daily interacting with them, doing video and doing her studies, giving them these different tools to use. So that was great for them. Some of the other non-primate animals at the zoo, like the goats and even the armadillo, we took them around into different areas of the zoo that they wouldn't normally go, and we were able to do that because the zoo was closed. So lots of animals got to meet each other that wouldn't normally have met each other, or just run around. Our pigs in the farm, they got to go into the duck pond, and they love the duck pond, and they splash around in the water. And there actually are a couple zoos. We were going to do it, and we may still later on, but there were a couple of zoos that were tracking cortisol levels in the animals through the COVID shutdown, and you could do that through fecal samples, through poop samples, and you do endocrinology studies on them, and you can come up with the cortisol levels, which is potentially an indicator of the stress level in the animals. And they wanted to compare that with the baseline in normal years and see how COVID affected the animals, either positively or negatively. And then in addition to that, in the enrichment of the animals, we also wanted to be careful with just potentially spreading COVID to the animals. There were a couple instances, not very many, where it did affect animals that were in zoos. There were a couple of big cats, and then the gorilla. There were a couple of gorillas that actually did become infected with COVID. And early on in the pandemic, there was some computer modeling done that was taking the genetic profiles of different animals and trying to model which ones could be infected with COVID. And some of the ones that were at the highest risk were animals like the great apes, and even animals like the giant anteaters, some of the cats. And based on the modeling, there's some animals like the South American monkeys that were not very affected potentially. So not knowing exactly all the details of that, we tried to be as careful as possible, wearing protective gear around the animals. And then when we did reopen, and even now, some of the species have greater setbacks for the public, just to be extra careful. So that's a little bit about what transpired here over the past year. So as a child, I did come to the zoo and participate in zoo camp. I also did the camp at the Ocean Institute in Dana Point. And I was looking through some of my papers a couple of years ago, and I found my little zoo camp certificate, my graduation certificate with a sticker on it. And the instructor that I had was none other than Janet Yamaguchi, who has a great association with the Discovery Cube. And then her husband Kent was actually the one that hired me in 2001 and was my boss for many years at the zoo here. So it's nice to see how that cycle continues. Lauren, who is here with me with the armadillo, she also has a similar story, similar story to me, and hopefully we're able to continue that and connect with kids that and encourage them to go into STEM based careers, into life sciences, and ultimately become great stewards of the planet we all share.